Okay, good. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, we could start that. What do you think? This could be a new thing. So this, as some of you know, is the Common Ground Fair weekend. Um, and this is the first time in maybe close to 10 years that I haven't been there the entire weekend. I'm doing, I'm either vendoring or volunteering or something, but this year through a series of mishaps, including my truck brakes failing and twisting my ankle and blah blah blah. Anyway, so my friend Rob and I went for the day yesterday. Now, Susan, you know Rob. Yes, I don't think anybody else does, but excuse me. We had a wonderful time. We had an amazing time. We got there at 7 o'clock in the morning, 2 hours before the fair opened, and just went around drinking coffee and talking to people. And the first people online at the coffee truck, which I think is a great honor. And then for breakfast, we wanted breakfast. Now, many of you, how many people do not know what a bialy is? Okay, how can I describe a bialy? I'm not, I don't even know if I can describe one, but it's a little roundish baked. I don't know. Somebody else help me here. How would you describe a bialy? This is like a koan.
It's similar to a bagel. It has onion with it. It's lighter than a bagel, smaller, and they're fabulous. And you can only get them in Manhattan.
Not true. You can get them
Although,
at Common Ground Fair.
ah, I'll go next year just to get a bialy.
But that's typically, I think they're Polish origin, maybe, or somewheres in that part of Eastern Europe. And they are definitely hard to find in Maine. But not only is there someone at the fair who sells bialys, and they sell the traditional bialy topped with onions, but they also serve a Maine wild blueberry bialy. And that may sound a little bit like pineapple pizza, but it's not. It's wonderful. It's amazing. You will, if you know, like when before your life ends, you should have a wild Maine blueberry bialy. Um, unlike a pineapple pizza, which nobody should ever have.
The
But
Japanese eat pineapple pizza.
well, that says it all. Okay, so anyway, so we had a really 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 wonderful day, and primarily because we met a lot of really nice people, and we visited the social activism place, and we visited the environmental activism place, and we just met a lot of nice folks. So it was really great. Uh, that saying, this is all going to make sense after a while. But so at the end of the day, my friend Rob is not at all well. Um, he's just about to turn 70, and the consequences of his military service have caught up with him. Um, and he's pretty severely ill at this time. It's kind of unclear where it's all headed because the things that happen to him don't happen to many other human beings. So the doctors are constantly sort of perplexed about it. But anyway, so I'm going to ask at the end of today that we'll do the Tara mantra for Rob and for anybody else that people would like to acknowledge in that way. One of the things that happened at the fair was that the people who are again people who don't know this, people know what At least Mainers know about Sears Island. Okay, some do, some don't. If you're not a Mainer, well, okay. So Sears Island is the largest undeveloped causeway connected island on the East Coast. It's about 900 acres and it's essentially completely except there's a little you call it a cell tower at one end and a couple of things, but other than that, it's all wooded and Penobscot Bay shorefront. And it's kind of honeycombed with trails. And it's one of my favorite places to go because I can wandering in the woods there is just lots of fun, and it's like historic. The cellar holes of the settlers' cabins are still present there. The old stone walls, and it was also a favorite summer place of the Wabanaki people. They went there for perhaps thousands of years. And it kind of, from my experience of it, kind of carries that spirit of connection to history, connection to the past, even as I'm walking through these woods. So obviously, something like that cannot be left alone. We need to develop it. And so our well, I was going to say our governor, but the Janet Mills is the fifth Maine governor in a row that's attempting to develop the island. It's been a cause célèbre of governors. I think, I don't know why, but it just drives them nuts that there's so much prime waterfront that isn't getting commercialized in some way. And so they found the perfect ruse. I see it as a ruse. That there's an interest in building a site to build wind turbines for offshore, assemble them. So they need to bring in those massive propellers, assemble them, and then they put them on boats and float them out into the Gulf of Maine where they will reside. So they've sort of now got green cover for developing the island. It's like, well, yeah, we're going to develop. It's not the whole island, part of the island. I think 100 acres, but it's for it's to produce wind turbines. It's to do a good thing for the environment. Meanwhile, kind of right next door, there's a point called Mac Point, and Mac Point is commercialized. It has oil tanks and cranes and all those things. And the people who own the land on Mac Point are saying, bring it here. We would love to have it. We are a commercial industrial area and we're perfect for putting together the wind turbines. But the governor of Maine, in its infinite wisdom, says, no, we want to put it on Sears Island. And I got to chat with some of the folks about this. Like, no one really has an explanation why the state is so fixated on, doing it that way when there's if there was no other site, there was no other way, it would be understandable. But here's a perfectly good site, already industrialized, no loss to the community. The jobs would be exactly the same, all of that sort of thing. And the state is pushing forward. To develop Sears. And anyway, I don't want to get on too far off on that tangent. Um, but it breaks my heart because it's such a wonderful place to walk and so much historic significance and so on. And just the idea that it's like, we just can't leave it alone. It's like 5 governors in a row have gone after it and tried to develop it, and each one has been thwarted. But Janet Mills now thinks that she can be the one who'll be successful. So that's kind of even more bizarre because she's supposed to be a sort of environmentally friendly Democratic governor. But I think the interest, there's, when I heard about all the sort of potential for what could go on there, there's probably billions to be made. And so that's just far too attractive to overlook. Anyway, enough about Sears Island. It breaks my heart. It just breaks my heart every time I walk there. Uh, And it says a lot, I guess, about where we are as a culture. That we can't use the perfectly acceptable site that the owners of the site want it, the community wants it, and we got to go to the other one because people see potential to make billions down the road. Enough for my frustrations. It was not quite what I want to talk about, but it's okay. What I want to talk about relates to that line from Leonard Cohen. Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in, right? It's such a beautiful line, beautiful song. So what it speaks to is imperfection, right? Imperfection is the nature of the universe. It is the nature of our lives. It is the nature of everything in our culture. We are imperfect. And that drives us nuts. One of the biggest reasons that we are not perhaps as happy, as content as we ought to be is that we are constantly pushing against that imperfection. We are constantly unable or unwilling to accept it. Right? And so we are constantly in a tension with life, with our own lives, with the lives around us. This is back to the fundamental teaching of the Buddha. The reason we suffer boils down to the fact that we can, and we are constantly grasping. We are constantly wanting other than what is right now. If we were content with what is right now, we would see that all of our lives are complete and perfect. That's a very radical statement, and I'll kind of back it up as I go along here. But all of our lives are complete and perfect. But we create our discontent, we create our suffering, we create our own misery. This goes right back to the Four Noble Truths of the Buddha. How do we do that? We do that in sometimes big ways, but sometimes tiny little ways. I have a perfectly good truck. It's about 5 or 6 years old now. Some old man that was driving it banged into something recently, so it has a dent in the side. It's not perfect, but it's more than good enough. It's a wonderful truck. And I drive around and I see all the newer trucks, and they look better than my truck. And they've tweaked it up, like my truck has 260 horsepower in its version. But if I got the new one, I'd have 300 horsepower, you know. Um, and the people who create the demand know that, right? They got a whole new bunch of colors. My God, they look really good. And my truck is black. I like a black truck, but oh my God, there's just these new, I don't even know how to describe these shades of green and gray that they're making trucks with. Right. So if I'm not really paying attention, I can go from being perfectly content and satisfied with my truck to, oh my God, I've got to have one of these new trucks, right? We do this all the time. I mean, that's a very simple, simplistic instance, but we do it all the time. I'd like to be younger. I'd like to be healthier. I'd like to have less achy bones, right? We could, this we are constantly dissatisfied with the state that we are in, that our lives are in, even when we're not aware of it. And we have a culture that supports that, right? I mean, the culture says we should be young and beautiful. Well, some of us, that boat sailed a long time ago. you know, we we should be athletic into our 80s or some crazy thing like that, you know. And so we are there's reinforcement for the idea that the cup is half empty. The cup is constantly half empty. And what the Buddha pointed out is the cup is constantly full. It's here that we see the emptiness, right? It's here that we create, no matter what our health is today, no matter how much money we have or we don't have, whether we have a beautiful house or we don't, our lives are still perfect and complete. But we, in our minds, create the inadequacies. We, in our minds, feel that somehow things are less than, don't have enough money, health is not good enough, so on and so forth. So we constantly live in the world of inadequacy, and we constantly, therefore, do not see the perfection and beauty in our lives. When we can really let go of those desires and delusional desires that we have, right? Those are the fact that I should think that I'm almost 80 and I don't have health problems. That's delusion. That's nuts, right? And yet, at some level, it's like, oh, why are my bones aching? Gee, what did I do to deserve this? Well, there's an answer to that question. I won't go there. But part of the answer is, hey, you're almost 80 years old, Peter. What, of course your bones ache. But we constantly see the cup as half empty, and we focus on that aspect. And because we cling to that, we can't see the wonder, the perfection of this very moment in our lives. Complete and perfect. We are lacking nothing. And again, we're in a culture that tells us, no matter how much money we have, the culture says you don't have enough money. There's a whole industry designed to make us feel inadequate. Because that inadequacy makes us better consumers. If I'm really experiencing the fact that things are complete and perfect in my life, and we could talk more, you can challenge that notion if you want, but then I don't have to go to the store. There's nothing I need to buy to make my life better. I need to buy food. I need to eat. There's things I need that are requisite to survival. But there's no purchase that I need that's going to create happiness for me. Right. And I see this kind of with relative to my process of aging. I think, oh, I've never been to Europe. I'd love to go to Europe before I die. Oh, I've never been to, wherever, and I'd love to do that before I die. Well, the truth is, I'm not going to do most of those things before I die. But if I'm clinging to that, here I am in the woods. I'm having a wonderful life. I'm surrounded by the trees and the animals. Most people would, cut off an arm to be living here. But what am I seeing? Oh, but I've never been there. I've never done that. I don't have that. Right. And now, as I get towards the end of my life, I'm never gonna. What if I didn't, I got to give up hope that I'm going to get the Ferrari, you know. But so it's out. What often separates us from being truly content, truly at peace, truly able to experience the miracle of this moment is all those sort of petty desires that arise endlessly. And so a huge part of our practice, if we want, I'm kind of often talking about our practice in terms of others, but in terms of ourselves, a huge part of our practice needs to be aware of those constantly arising discontents and letting go of them. Because the only thing that's blocking me from seeing the perfection of this moment is between the ears up here. It's the thoughts that I have that I don't have enough, that I don't have the right things, that things should be different. I shouldn't have pain in my body. I shouldn't be getting old. But hello, right? So we kind of defy reality, we attempt to. That's the kind of denial that we as human beings have. We should have this, we should have that, we should be this. Our Zen ancestors used the phrase just this. Just this is perfect. If we can just leave it alone, just be with it, just live fully, experience fully. This is really a radical shift in a culture that tells us that we don't have enough, that we aren't enough. Look at all the people that are having cosmetic surgeries, spending tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to make their bodies perfect, rather than simply, well, as Leonard is pointing out, the beauty of the imperfection. That's where the light gets in, not the beauty of perfection, which is pretty much impossible. Living our lives as they are, accepting our lives as they are, throwing ourselves into our lives with passion, not indifference, not being lukewarm about living, but embracing life fully just as it is. That's one of the core messages of the Dharma, right? And how do we do that? We let go. You've heard those two words before out of my mouth. But it's a process that there's two parts to it. One, the first part is recognizing when I am somehow not content with what I have, what's going on with this moment. And when I recognize it, it's like, okay, I'm clinging, I am grasping, I am, trying to hold on to something. And then I need to let go. And I may need to do that well, every day, many times a day, probably. Because we're sort of working against both personal and cultural influences. Now we might say, but there are things that are really wrong in the world. There are so many beings that are suffering. Back to my Sears Island story, but in a way that, that's it's not minor in my life, but it's minor. I mean, compared to the children in the streets in Gaza, compared to the, you know, enormous suffering that's going on in parts of Africa. Tremendous violence and famine and all of these things. So should I just work at being content in a way that I don't respond to those things? That I'm like, oh, those are just attachments. And I need to let them go. Now, I don't have a really good answer to that, but the answer that I come up with is that I need to acknowledge those things. I need to respond to them as I'm called to, but I also need to hold them lightly and not carry them with me throughout the day. That the world does not benefit. The world benefits if I act. The world does not benefit if I worry. And so I think there's a sort of an algorithm in which we acknowledge, in which we respond, and then which we let go. Acknowledge that suffering, respond to that suffering, and then let go. So we're not carrying it with us all the time. And again, that will crop up. And when it does, I think there's a slightly different question is, can I do something about it? Can I do something about Gaza? That's the one that's most prominent in my mind these days. Can I do something about all the children that are suffering there? Can I do something about all the hostages and their families, and so on and so forth? And in my mind, the answer is, well, I can't do much, but yes, I can do something. Starting by not ignoring it, acknowledging it, and then what can I do? It's thousands of miles away. Maybe I can make some donations to some international aid organizations. Maybe I can write a letter to the editor. I'm limited. I'm not in a position to do very much, but I'm in a position to do something. So rather than go into denial and ignore the situation, I feel like I'm called on to acknowledge it and act and then let it go. Because to go beyond that point of action only amplifies my suffering and it does no good for Gaza or any other crisis in the world. And that's a tricky dance. That's a very tricky dialectic to kind of maintain. But I think that as human beings, as Zen practitioners, I think that's what's called for. Thank you.
Uh, Thank you, Peter. Um, I think that when we talk about perfection and beauty, and every moment is perfection and beauty, there's a message which could be interpreted as, well, if you become a Buddhist, then your life will be happy all the time because it will be perfect and beautiful. And and even with the idea of recognizing the problem and responding as best you can and then let go. But I also know that you have spoken of, and I think we all have felt, that through this practice we also feel pain and loss very deeply, and that sometimes in the grieving process, you have to sit with that, and calling that perfection is a stretch, much as we'd like to think that perfection is without pain. So I think I just maybe need to hear a few more words uh, about perfection and pain and grieving and loss.
If we look at some of the great contemporary teachers, and I have two in mind. One is Thich Nhat Hanh, the other is the Dalai Lama. They are both from peoples that have suffered greatly. And I believe that they suffer. Well, Thich Nhat Hanh, he's still alive, isn't he? He's not, no, he passed. Okay. So, anyway, so when he was alive, and the Dalai Lama, obviously, he is alive, I think they suffered. They felt the pain of their people every day. Um, certainly, certainly during the Vietnam War for Thich Nhat Hanh, and right up to this moment for the Dalai Lama. You know, they're both from countries that have suffered greatly and from people that they are deeply connected with, and therefore they must, I would believe, have felt the pain every day. Right. And yet lived with abundance, happiness. How is that possible? So the ability that they had was to grieve when they were grieving and be happy when they were happy. Right. To shed the tears, to feel the pain, to be, both of them have been activists in their own way. And you'd be hard pressed to find a picture of the Dalai Lama where he isn't smiling. You know, so that's maybe the term to use there is skillful means. Upaya is the Sanskrit word. To move through this world with all of its complexities, all of its suffering, all of its pain, and to simultaneously being able to let go of that and live deeply and with great clarity in each moment of our lives. And that's an enormous task. I mean, I suspect if we asked the Dalai Lama, he would say there are many times, many days that he's not successful at that. It would be hard for me to imagine that there aren't days that he's depressed about what's happened in Tibet. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that as a human being, that would be natural. But then he rebalances. He uses the power of the Dharma to open himself to a different perspective.
So in Leonard Cohen's saying that it's through the imperfection where the light comes in, that's kind of like seeing the imperfection as the perfection.
Yeah, it's like the identity of relative and absolute. The two things are not really different, only in our minds. Yeah, things
So
are
it's
perfectly imperfect.
yes, and that also kind of balances the loaded term that the word perfection has for many of us. I think we think perfection. Oh, it's wonderful. Perfection sometimes has to be seen through the imperfection, and it's
Yeah,
not
and it's
always
so
happens.
contrary. I was talking earlier about sort of physical appearance. In our culture, we see perfection, the young person with the flawless skin and no wrinkles, nothing sags, nothing, as the epitome of beauty. We don't see a person whose face and whose body has been transformed by life as beautiful. And yet that is beautiful. We're so fixated on this perfect youth, but we carry that into so many other things. So imperfection is not something to be shunned or avoided. Imperfection is what makes us who we are. We each have imperfections. We each have different imperfections. In a sense, it's part of our uniqueness. It's part of our identity. It's part of who we are in the world.
Maureen Stewart defined it in a way that was helpful for me in saying that we are whatever is a perfect manifestation of all the causes and conditions that have come into play until now. And it is, those wrinkles are a manifestation of everything that has been happening. The war is a perfect manifestation of the conditions that have been at play, however wretched those conditions. And then we move on from there. And maybe we can change what happens from here or not.
I got these gray hairs from the dinosaurs. Actually, there's a sense in which that's true.
Thank you for that, Margaret. Um, it reminds me a little bit of Kamala Harris saying, "You didn't fall out of a coconut tree. We are the product of everything that has come before and is all around us." Thank you.
And in an absolutely unbroken line, all the way back to primordial ooze and beyond, which is astounding when you think about it.
I have a story that kind of catches me on the cusp of this. And I don't want to stray too far, but this has to do with a burial plot. Um, I was on a hill in Nebraska, where I'm from, not that area, but not far from it. Rolling, beautiful hill, a tiny little cemetery, about the third of the size, the length of a football field, and about half as wide. So it's not big. Norwegian pines there by a settler who came there on top of a hill. And the hill rolls and rolls and rolls in all directions. It's right at the crossroads of a hill. An old church is on the corner. Uh, used to be stables there and years ago when farmers would come there. And the cemetery really appealed to me. It's so beautiful and quiet, and the wind comes and the trees move, and it's beautiful. It's a kind of solace, and I think about it quite a bit actually. So anyway, I have a plot there, and my family is elsewhere, but that doesn't matter. And so the cemetery director called me this weekend, which was very unusual. I like the man very much. Met him a couple of times, and our families way back knew one another. I don't know any of these people. Wasn't a farmer. I didn't live out in that area, but there's a lot of my last names on mailboxes going up and down hills and gravel roads. And anyway, he said that there were some volunteer trees that had been growing up on the other side of the fence, and I had seen them there. And so evidently somebody came in who was a farmer and bought up the land that is on two sides of the cemetery. And so he's new to that area. And so because it's a crossroads, there's roads on the other sides, but he bought the surrounding land. Well, he decided to take out the trees, and because of that, he also just simply decided that it was a little silly to have a fence there, so he tore out the fence as well. Now, the cemetery director is a wonderful man, and he said, there's a man who has to do with the allocation of funds for county cemeteries. It would be helpful if you would call him. There's only a few people I know who would do this. I'm an employee, but in some ways, and a farmer, but it would be nice to hear from somebody else as to what they think about this. And I said, Vic, why did he do it? And he said, well, I have to say that I think the truth of this is that he wanted a few more rows of corn, and the fence was impeding, so he just simply took out the fence. Now, I'm really hurt by this because I know the beauty of that, and there are some vets there all the way back, probably, I don't know if Civil War, but maybe, I think maybe post-Civil War, but the lives of those farmers and so forth that are around in that plot developed that land and became a community and settled it. And so to me, it's hallowed ground. And he gave me the phone number of the man to call who allocates the funds and said, I would hope that you would do this. And he said, but you've got to do it rather repeatedly because he doesn't tend to answer his phone, and they're going to have a hearing on it past Tuesday morning. So I called 5 times on a Monday because I got the call on a Sunday night. And he said, by the way, he doesn't tend to answer his phone. And also, if you leave a message, he doesn't tend to listen to his messages. So I called and called and called and called. And finally, I had to leave a message. And I said, Mr. Peterson or whatever his name is, I think it's that or Robinson Peterson. I'm not quite sure. And I said, my relatives, are in that cemetery, and there are roots going back very far. And this farmer, as far as I can understand, by taking out the fence, at minimum, was unneighborly. And at maximum, it was a sacrilege. This to me is hallowed ground. It's peaceful ground. His only offer was he was going to string a wire between fence posts, just a wire, which would not keep out cattle, coming in, etc. And I said the essentially is as strong as I can possibly appeal. That fence needs to be put back up, and perhaps it would be incumbent on the man who tore it out to replace it. Now, I'm hurt in two ways, or caught in two ways by this. One is I think it's such a transgression of sensitivities that anyone would do this. It gets me because I put myself there after death because I kind of wanted, not everyone's going to flock to the middle of Nebraska to see my monument, which is not nothing, but I wanted it there because it's an adventure. You can't just go downtown and walk into a cemetery. You have to go someplace and you have to experience trees and farmland and wind, no matter what time of year. And so it carries with it something else, which I value. And so I'm obviously deeply involved in this. And the second thing is, in our talking today and through the week, I've been thinking, well, life changes, things are impermanent. You have to kind of understand this. And we talked about skillful means, of getting through. And we've just talked about the sum of history is determined by all the parts that led to it, and so I can go back into the history of this man who seems to me, at least in my imperfect knowledge of this, imperfectly raised or has imperfect sensitivities, and now I'm caught in others in feeling deeply about this. So. It takes some skillful means to come back up out of this happy. I don't know what the outcome is, but I think it kind of plays on the theme of this, and I'll say it this way: this man's discontent or unknowledge. It's humanity traded in for dollars, and anyway, it's something I'm just sharing because it's caught me on the cusp of trying to understand how to live with this and both accept it and reject it at the same time, I guess. Anyway, thanks.
Thank you, Cal. That's powerful. And it speaks to so much of what's going on. The tension between what you said, the humanity, the sacredness, versus make a little more money. I think that's a thing that's happening a lot in this culture. And I don't think that I referenced happiness in my talk. I wouldn't expect you to come up happy. You should be upset, right? You describe it, this is a sacrilege. What did you say? This goes back, graves going back hundreds of years, people who served the country, et cetera, et cetera. Farmers who worked their whole lives on that land. To be disrespected in that way, that's that's awful. And that speaks to a lot of the world that we're in today, So speaking up for that, for those who can't speak to this, I think is so important. And it should be, you would be a sociopath if it wasn't painful to you. Hallowed ground that family and neighbors have been put to rest in, being disrespected. That's, I think, painful to any human being. But the balance that you spoke to at the end, that's the skillful means. That's, kind of the best we can do is to balance it, and hold it in tension. Hold the pain, and also release the pain. Acknowledge, in this case, not strictly suffering, but sacrilege, and sacrilege produces suffering. And also, sort of be able to let it go. You're doing what you can. You're taking action. You're doing what you can. But at the end of the day, you will be powerless. Whoever the board is or the commissioners are, whoever, they're going to make a decision, that you have little control over. So I think this is precisely the struggle that we all have, the challenge that we all have, to both respond from our humanity and also acknowledge when we're powerless, when we can't determine the outcome, and when we have to accept something that's repugnant. And that can take time. That kind of healing can take a long time.
Thanks, Peter.
Of course. It's interesting to me because I've never seen history as very important. But my friend Elizabeth is a genealogist, but much more, I'd call her a microhistorian because she goes into the lives of the people, of the families, what happened, who married whom, what child died at age 2, and on, this amazing tapestry of the lives of our forebears. And it's given me a whole new appreciation, because we are the expression in this moment of all that's come in the past. And we try to detach ourselves from it, but we're not detached from it. I mean, we are literally not at the genetic level or the epigenetic level, but far more, what happened to our forebears back through all of time does matter and I believe, should be respected, should be held with a certain amount of, I don't know what the word is, but maybe an expression of loving kindness towards the past. But sort of coming back to the original question, even that pain is part of the perfection of our lives. If we can hold it in that light, when we try to reject it, we say, it shouldn't be, I shouldn't be feeling this pain. Now we're suffering. If we're saying, I'm feeling this pain because of my connection to the past, to my ancestors, to my family, to, to the land, to the farms, whatever, then it's part of it's completely appropriate and we don't suffer. Okay.
Peter, last week I asked the Sangha if I could today, if I could send them the obituary of my friend Andy, who died a couple weeks ago. And I did that, and I suggested that I read a short letter that I wrote to him and read at his memorial service. And I think it kind of fits with this. It's a little different, but would this be a good time for me to do that?
Sure, sure.
Thank you. So, my friend Andy McCusker died a couple weeks ago, and I wanted to talk to the Sangha about him because he was such a example of someone with a beginner's mind. The week before he died, he had a couple of falls. One, he was out running on the trail, and he saw a bird up in the tree, and he put his attention on the bird and tripped on the roots on the trail. And then just a couple days later, he's riding his bike, and he rides by a playground, and there were children on the playground. So he's riding by, waving to the children on the playground, and he falls. So that was how Andy lived his life. And he didn't die from his falls. He was perfectly fine. It was a heart attack. But there were about 150 people in the backyard, and it was like a family party. He came from a huge Irish Catholic family, and they always had these gatherings. His wife, Diane, was my law partner for many years, and Andy was 77, and so that's a little bit of the background. So if it's all right, I will read the letter. Dear Andy, look at all of us gathered here today. Even Donald Trump would be envious of your crowds. Indeed, your family and friends have come from far and near, and we are staging that kick-ass party of a lifetime. A 5K warm-up, followed by cornhole and bocce, pigs in their blankets, a kiddie pool filled with refreshments, and your gorgeous backyard, filled with golden September foliage and people who love you. Many years ago, I recall Diane telling me that she had found the love of her life in you. The attraction began when you saw Diane's endless summer surfing poster, or at least you used that ploy to woo her to Higgins Beach for an afternoon of surfing. Obviously, the experience left you both stoked, so you two embarked on your own endless summer. Surfing, biking, skiing, hiking through Europe and the Southwest, inflating plastic Santas on the lawn, and sharing the mystery and wonder of ancient artwork in Canyonlands National Park. On September 25th, 2010, a day of gleaming weather similar to today, I was honored to perform your and Diane's wedding ceremony, and that made me privy to the quietly spoken marriage vows you each exchanged. To this day, I remember Diane's expression of love to you as one of the most touching I have ever heard, and totally personal to you. She gazed up to those ocean blue eyes of yours and said, I love you when we pull up in front of our house and Scooter jumps up to look at us and you sing, "How much is that doggy in the window?" That's as deep a profession of love as I have ever heard, especially since Scooter had her behavioral and health challenges. But none of those fazed you, and you both spoiled her and cared for her. Just this last week, Diane told me she found your to-do list. It was reminding you to purchase 6 talking hamsters for the neighborhood kids. No worries, Andy. Diane placed the order. When I heard this story, you inspired me to order one too. It was supposed to arrive a couple days ago, but did not. I suspect others who read the write-up sparked a run on talking hamsters, as well there should be. When I think about your life well lived, I see you walking on the edge of wonder, and you'd often topple into it with pure childlike delight. I think that immersion into wonder must have fueled you to bring your light back into the world. You made us feel like our jokes were funny, our opinions were wise, and we were loved and appreciated for our feeble and few talents. Every one of us here has been touched by your light, Andy. We owe it to you to continue your tradition. And thus, you will always be with us as we work to access our inner talking hamster. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Susan. I think I want to close out here. I wanted to do the term mantra for Rob, but we'll do that next week. And I told RJ we would talk about some retreats. I think that ought to be next week, that we can just stay with this as we close out. Because what I think this has been is a clear demonstration of that phrase, there's a crack in everything, and that's how the light gets in. So we're both acknowledging the cracks and seeing the light. It comes out of this, comes out of our hearts, comes out of being human, comes out of caring. Being a human is a real messy thing, isn't it? But it's precisely that messy thing that makes it worth living. So let's just close with our vows, unless anybody has anything they want to add.
Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it.
Thank you, everybody.